This podcast is proudly sponsored by Gyro Drilling. They provide world-class drilling solutions for all types of projects. They specialise in auger, air core and RC drilling. Head to the team at Gyro Drilling for all your mining needs and see how they can help you with your upcoming project.
So hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull podcast. Joining me on the show today is Andrew Ferrier, the Managing Director of Global Uranium and Enrichment, listed on the ASX under code GUE. And as the name would suggest, we're going to be talking a lot about uranium and nuclear. Particularly, they have a fair amount of assets in North America and a little bit of gold, I believe, in New South Wales. But most of the conversations on the uranium today. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate the opportunity. Glad to speak about that GUE and everything that's happening in the uranium space.
So let's start. Uranium, I'm a big bull fan of it. It's been, in captivating, even in Australia at the moment with the political discussions, what's going to happen with uranium. But the North American market is unfolding even in quicker and elsewhere around the world. But let's start with your history and how you've really found yourself within this realm of nuclear uranium and the mining scene. So talk to us about your history.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. So I guess my background is in chemical engineering and finance. I was a chemical engineer for 3 or 4 years out of university, but I spent the bulk of my time in mining private equity, which is how I initially got into the uranium space. I was working for a company called Pacific Road Capital. We raised close to $1 billion, largely out of US endowment funds, and we invested it globally across the world in all sorts of commodities. But one of the key investments we made was into a company or a project called the Reno Creek Project, which was an ISR project in Wyoming. And we basically held that privately for a period of about 5 to 6 years, from 2012 to 2018. And that was a very bleak time in the uranium market. So I got to know the industry extremely well through that. And it was a great project. It's around a 30 million pound resource in the Powder River Basin. And we sold that project to a company called UEC, which is now a multi-billion-dollar company, and it's gone on to great things and built out a bigger pipeline in Wyoming as well. So really enjoyed the industry, and that's why why I wanted to get back into it with this role here with GUE.
So talk us to what GUE is. It's Global Uranium and Enrichment, and under the banner, when I was researching, there's a whole host of projects scattered across North America and Canada, and then it was just the depth of it is quite phenomenal. So talk to us about what the company is and a little bit about its mission and what its focuses are.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're sort of very focused on developing a mid-tier uranium company. So we've been very busy over the last couple of years acquiring assets, largely assets in the uranium space in the US, which is where we're really focused on. So we have sort of 2 to 3 key projects there. The main one being our Tallahassee uranium projects, which we just completed a drill program on. It's one of the biggest undeveloped uranium deposits in the US, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a whole lot more. We also have a Maybell uranium project in Colorado. We have another really interesting asset in the LaSalle district in Utah as well. We've picked up 6 different projects in the Athabasca Basin. We hold about 60,000 hectares of properties up there. Some of it's very, very interesting, basement-style hosted deposit exploration targets, very shallow drilling, and we're very keen on those properties and keen to drill them moving forward as well. And then we also have an investment in Uranium, and Uranium is, again, a very interesting investment we made. We're the largest shareholder. It's an Australian private company focused on developing a chemical enrichment technology, and the enrichment space at the moment is incredibly interesting. A lot of regulatory, geopolitical things happening in the background, which means the focus on enrichment globally is very high. So you think about GUE, we've got 50 million pounds of resource in the US under Tallahassee. We've got excellent exploration grounds in the Athabasca, and we've invested in an enrichment company, right? And all that sits in a company we've at the moment has a market cap of only $30 million. So it's we offer a lot of exposure to a lot of different things for our shareholders, and we're very, very focused on developing those US uranium assets.
So bringing in all these projects, you alluded to before, you've been in the industry for a long time and seen the ups and downs of it. So accumulating and bringing all these in, how long has this strategy been unfolding? And especially over the last handful of years, the uranium thematics have particularly shifted a lot as, the new generation of people are now really seeing nuclear reactors and nuclear energy as part of the renewable mix. How has that all shifted and really been, beneficial for GUE as you guys have assimilated more projects?
Yeah, and I think that's a sort of a question of where are we in the cycle. So are obviously continuing to look at assets and build the portfolio under management essentially, and we've got a very good eye for what works and doesn't work in the US. But if you think about where the uranium industry is in general, I still think it's got a long way to go, right? So if you look today, there's still probably only 100, 120 sort of listed uranium companies around the world. And you go back to the last uranium boom, I think there was 450, right? So there's a lot, like when the uranium price continues to go up, which we all believe it will, I think that you're going to see a whole lot more of a rush for uranium projects. And we're also getting in front of that and building that portfolio. And I think when the uranium price ticks up and people across the globe start having more interest in nuclear and uranium, which we're seeing, a huge increase in over the last 12 to 18 months with the uranium price going up, I think we're going to be really well positioned for that. And we've got a team that has a huge amount of experience in the US, like with the Reno Creek project I mentioned before, we actually took that all the way through permitting. It's a fully permitted ISR mine. So that was, and a key guy that worked on that project now works for me. So we've actually permitted uranium mines in the US before, and there's not many other companies that can say they've done that.
And speaking of the US, what really is unfolding with their perception of uranium exploration, mining, processing, and just that, because a lot of Australians are seeing it, but the North American market is at a different stage comparatively to where we are. So can you just elaborate a bit more about what's been unfolding there and how it's all unpacking?
Yeah, so I'll try and, set the landscape a little bit about what's happening in the US. So the US still is the world's biggest nuclear power, has more nuclear reactors than any other country. They have 92, 93 operating reactors as we speak. But since, the early 1980s, they've let its domestic uranium production basically dwindle to nothing. So over the last couple of years, there's actually been no yellow cake produced out of the US. That's changed slightly in the last, 6 months with a few mines commissioning, but again, they're relatively small. The US needs about 50 million pounds of uranium in total every year. And to provide some context, the entire global market's about 180 million pounds. So the US is the biggest demand for yellow cake there is. And what they're seeing now, and it's bipartisan, it's supported by both Republicans and both Democrats, they are both pro-nuclear, is that they're putting a huge amount of money into supporting the nuclear industry in the US. A lot of that money is going into the entire nuclear, cycle in terms of going into, tax incentives for nuclear reactors. A lot of it's particularly focused on enrichment, which is a really important part of the nuclear cycle as well. And that's where they see the actual critical shortage at this point in time. But at the same time, I think they're going to be very supportive for people looking to put uranium mines into production in the US. And you've seen them do that through providing, yellow cake contracts at a premium to existing, or companies coming into production very shortly. And I think you're going to continue to see this go forward, right? Nuclear is 20% of all their energy, right? That's a big number when you think about the world's biggest economy. And they're going to want to see that grow moving forward.
Yeah, and we know that everyone loves working with Australians, which is also beneficial. And the outlook for uranium means that, new discoveries, new exploration and the enrichment, which you talked about at the beginning, and we'll get to that later. But we focus now in Tallahassee, which you mentioned was the flagship project. Can you talk about what that project is, a little bit of the drilling results and updates, and just paint the picture of what that project looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, obviously Tallahassee's our flagship asset. We have a JORC compliant resource there of close to 50 million pounds. The entire district is, closer to 80, 90 million pounds, which again is one of the bigger undeveloped uranium projects in the US. The project's in Colorado, not too far from Canyon City, which for context is about, let's say 150 kilometers south of Denver. We've been working on this project for the last couple of years. We picked it up for a series of 2 separate transactions. And one of the key things about Tallahassee is it's private minerals on private land, which is a huge advantage when you start talking about other projects which may be on state leases or BLM, which is federal land as well. So there's a huge advantage there. this project's had a huge amount of work done on in the past, right? It's had thousands of drill holes. Cyprus in the 1970s got a full-blown mine permit to mine this project as an open pit and underground project. When the 3 Mile incident occurred in the early 1980s, they effectively walked away with it. But we're blessed with a huge amount of information on this project, and we've been pulling all that information together over the last couple of years. We got a permit to drill this project earlier this year, and we just completed a highly successful drill program on Tallahassee. We effectively just drilled 8 core holes into essentially the guts of the deposit. And the key focus of that was we're not trying to necessarily expand or create more certainty around the size of the resource. There's so much drilling in it already. We're very comfortable around that. We needed some core because we plan on doing some lab work with that core to better understand and map out the scoping study that we plan to achieve on that project in the coming months, right? So, and that's all that work's underway as we speak. But I think the key thing, if you look at some of the drill results of that Tallahassee project, and I'll read some of them out to you shortly because we're very proud of them. But there's some of the better, drill results you'll get outside the Athabasca. We were hitting 53 meters of 0.15% uranium. So that's 1,500 ppm. We hit 66 meters of 0.127% uranium. So, and there's some very, very high grade plus 1% uranium hits inside those intercepts as well. So I encourage people to, when they look at those grades, is compare it to other projects in Australia and Africa. They're obviously not as good as some of the grades in the Athabasca, but the Athabasca is incredibly unique in that respect. And just compare it to other projects, even in the US, in terms of both the width of those intercepts and the grade of those intercepts. And they, when you combine those two, you sort of talk about grade thicknesses there. These grade thicknesses were really off the scale, quite a surprise to us as well. So it just continues to hammer home that how much of a quality asset this Tallahassee project is. And we're just going to use that core, do the work we want to do, and put out a scoping study on this project. Sort of.
No, that's incredible. I mean, my point was going to be then, when can people anticipate the results coming out, and then the duration of how long the scoping study might take before, again, the bigger picture starts being painted, and then it's a long way before it becomes into production. But talk us through those timelines.
Yeah, so the scoping study is well underway as we speak. The core's been sent for lab work, and sort of just clearly understanding how long that lab work will take and the results around it will come in will dictate the scoping study to a little bit. But at this point in time, we've clearly indicated the market. We hope to have that done by the end of Q3 this year, and we're running full steam ahead to that. Oh, I think why we're so excited about the scoping study is we can sort of start talking about, development timelines, size of production, put some real meat on the bones about what this project is, and hopefully that will help it stand out from the crowd a little bit in terms of a lot of the other projects. As I said before, the US needs 50 million pounds of uranium every year, right? So projects of scale should come with a premium in a boom market where geopolitics are playing a big role in where and how assets are valued around the world.
So does that mean, again, given your position in Tallahassee and near what was it, 50 kilometers away from Colorado, I mean, the probably the environment there is probably quite pro-mining, or at least becoming a little bit more friendly of it. And then is the government support and sort of the regulatory bodies, are they quite enthusiastic about what you guys are working with, or are you still waiting to really engage them and find out what funding pathways and even, government grants support packages might be like, given where it is located in the US?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're obviously going through our permitting stage at this point to get our exploration permit, which has been great. And the authorities and regulators around that have been incredibly supportive, actually, in getting us to this point in time. I think when we progress the asset, we can start sort of delving more into those conversations about what sort of funding packages, assistance, who are the most likely funders of a project like this. I think once a scoping study is obviously pretty helpful because it puts some metrics around the project that you can go have those discussions. And I think, you rapidly walk into a pre-feasibility study as well, post that scoping study. And when you have all those things lined up, you start de-risking the project. And again, I know I'm overstating this, but just we have so much historical data, right? We're not, the cost of replicating that today would be tens of millions of dollars. Absolutely no exaggeration. We're blessed with all that data today, which means we sort of get a running start at this project, which is a huge help. But our focus really scoping study, pre-feasibility study, and then once we have that in place, I think you can start really getting into those conversations in earnest.
So that again is attracting a lot of attention. But you alluded to the Athabasca Basin, and you said from the outset you've also got packages and tenements in that part of the world, which we know is renowned for uranium exploration. So what's unfolding in your Athabasca Basin projects? Because there's quite a few of them within that, I guess, label or banner that's on the website and the announcements.
Yeah, so and I'll divert the question a little bit, because while the Athabasca is 100% a focus for us, our next actual proposed drill program, well, it's not proposed, it's under, we're getting ready for it as we speak, is drilling at our Maybell project, which is another uranium project we have in Colorado. We'll be drilling there in early August, and it's a great asset as well. It's been a historical producer, produced over 5 million pounds at over 1,000 ppm, so it's very high grade, shallow mineralization, and we're going to drill about 15,000 feet into that project come August this year. So that drill program will take about 30 to 45 days. We're very excited about that project, largely because over the last 12 months, we've gone out and acquired a whole bunch of data on that project. Pulling all that data together has taken time, getting it into geological databases, which we can actually use the information, took a bit of time as well. But when we looked at it, we're very excited. We put an exploration target out on that project as well late last year. We think there's some real potential for some shallow, high-grade mineralization at Maybell. So that we're going to be very excited about that drilling and getting those drill results out come August. So that's literally 4, 5, 6 weeks away. And the other thing at Maybell is that shallow mineralization is very interesting. It sits in what's called the Upper Browns Formation, which is a key formation coming down from Wyoming. We're also very keen to test what's called the Lower Browns Formation, which is sits underneath that shallow high-grade mineralization. And some of the historical reports we're seeing on that have talked about very, very large resources at lower grades. And in this market with an ever-increasing uranium price, I think we're going to poke some holes into that Lower Browns Formation and see what the actual potential of that project potentially could be as well.
Okay. And that, again, both, sorry, I should say, in Colorado, it's at a slightly different sort of stage compared to the flagship project. But I mean, talking about potentially some of the players in the area, I mean, is there lots of other sort of notable companies, or are you guys going in and pretty much putting a bit of a spotlight on this project in this area?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you think about Maybell, where it sits, it's in Moffat County in Colorado, which is very sort of northwestern Colorado. So that it's actually just an extension from a lot of existing uranium mineralization, which is very well known about in Wyoming, which is the state north. So we're while it is in Colorado, slightly south, we're actually just in the same mineralization formation that a lot of other uranium mines have been based in as well. So there's very well-known mineralization, obviously previously been mined over an extensive period of time, and actually 2 periods of time as well. So there's a huge amount of data on this project, and a lot of people that we talk to about our plans at Maybell are very knowledgeable at Maybell, and some of them actually worked in it before. So we're not breaking ground in any uncharted territories here at all, and that's a little bit what the US is. There's been a lot of historical mining there, and picking up these projects and leveraging off the existing data and sort of putting new life into the potential of those projects is a great way to create value for your shareholders.
So drilling comes in August, and then that program going for, I sort of lose track of how long some drilling programs go, but then of course they go off and they get the results done. What sort of timeline and what's going through your brain depending on what comes out of that? It's hard to sort of say what's going to happen until you get proof is in the pudding, but what are you then thinking after that's all unfolded?
Yeah, so you're right. We're obviously we're keen to get those results out to the market, and in the way they, you can gamma log those drill results means you actually get the results very quickly in the uranium space, which is fantastic and helps you sort of dictate your next moves in terms of where you're going to actually, drill after that as well. But in as an overall way we're thinking about Maybell is to complete this program, explore the shallow high grade resource, talk about putting a potential JORC compliant resource around that mineralization off the back of the exploration target that we completed last year, and then test out deeper potential And if it sticks together, we're obviously really keen to drill it, potentially put out an exploration target on that Lower Browns formation as well. All that stuff will take the rest of the year essentially for us to pull together, because we have the Tallahassee scoping study on concurrently with that, but we're already lining everything up to make that happen as quickly as possible.
Okay, so there's a lot of stuff happening there. And then if I do redirect to
Yeah.
the other part of North America in the Athabasca Basin, naturally from the sounds of it, you've got to be careful on how you're allocating your capital, because there's a lot unfolding and a lot of projects and drilling. And drilling, we know, is not overly cheap, but
No,
you get
especially not
sorted.
in
It's
Athabasca. Yeah.
no, that's sort of part of the thing. So talk about, what those projects are. It might not be necessarily drill there, but what's really going through the team's brain when thinking what you're going to do with that, because we know that's a hotbed for uranium activity, but seasonality and a lot of other components also make it a little bit more difficult to be there 24/7.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we've held these Athabasca assets now for nearly 2 years, and we had them for a while. We bought them before there was a huge rush into the Athabasca as well. So we picked up some very interesting projects. There's sort of 6 projects in total, as I mentioned before, close to 60,000 hectares. The key focus of the Athabasca projects are our Newnham and Perch projects, which are on the sort of northeast fringe of the Athabasca Basin. We've done a lot of work on those projects over the last 12 months, and we did a pretty substantial airborne program on them last year as well. And what I said is there's a lot, 10 to 12 walk-up exploration targets, which are shallow. We can hit basement rock on our Newnham project within the first 50 to 150 meters. And that's a really important component when you talked about cost. Drilling in the Athabasca is expensive. So if you're drilling shallower targets, obviously gives you a chance of success to be a lot higher. We've held those projects. We very consciously decided not to drill those projects out this North American summer. So sort of think about right now, June, July, August this year.
Yeah.
We raised money earlier this year and was very focused on developing those US projects, Tallahassee and Maybell, as we've spoken about. That being said, the next logical point in time to go drill out Newnham would be January next year, when North American winter. We're certainly thinking about that as we speak now, but obviously that will develop over the coming months. We'll develop our plans over the coming months around that. But that project is desperate for some drilling, and we think it has a huge amount of exploration upside there as well. So the next key step, as you said, is to get out there and drill that, and that would be January, February next year.
Okay, and you're working across, again, different jurisdictions, different states, and we know the thematic for uranium, but how are you managing, different, I guess, political groups and relations with traditional owners and all of that across so many different areas that all probably have slightly different nuances to exploration and uranium in particular?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we're very focused on, and the simple answer is I have a very small but a very good team, right? So
Nice.
in the US, we have 2 guys that have worked extensively in the US. They understand the importance of forming really important relationships with your stakeholders, and we've done that really well at our Tallahassee project. So we've got a great relationship with the landowners, got a good relationship with the wider community, and a good relationship with our regulators as well. So that's seen us been able to rapidly advance that project in the Athabasca. I've had really good success. I've spent time up in the Athabasca myself, and which was fantastic. So we've got to really know the First Nations groups up in that part of the world, in the Black Lake First Nation area. That's been great. That was actually time really well spent for us. And we've had our permit on Newnham project. We're in the process of getting that permit renewed. So we continue just to do things the right way, and it pays off in the long term.
Speaking of team, who was alongside of you on either the board and or management / again the global team? Because we're speaking in 2 different areas, and most of, or if not most of the team should be in North America / Canada. So talk to us about who's surrounding you on the board and management team.
Yeah, so the board is a 3-person board at the moment. We think that's, we want to say incredibly nimble. We try and say very fast paced. We're obviously doing a lot of stuff, looking at a lot of stuff, and we understand the need to continue to grow the company. So the board at the moment is just 3 people. Obviously I, as the MD, sit on the board, our chairman, Fabrizio Pirelli, is based here in Sydney with me, which is fantastic. He's got a long, distinguished career here in Sydney, largely through property development, but also a very smart guy when it comes to mining and commercial negotiations and stuff like that. So we would speak, a couple of times a day. So we're very active and maintain that dialogue. And he's very engaged in what the company's doing. Our other director is Matt Keane, who a lot more people will know. He's based in Perth. He's been a great director. Only joined the board earlier this year, but already added a huge amount of value. He's got a really deep experience in the uranium space from his old research days as well. So he's been a fantastic supporter of ours, and we just continue to push forward.
And the other fascination that I had this, as you said at the outset, was the enrichment side of it and the investment into a private company and the technology of this uranium enrichment. And I don't know really much about that process, but I can imagine it's quite time-consuming, difficult, and potentially, that not many people do it. So what were the thought processes? Give us a little bit of insight into that, so listeners can understand, why you guys are in it and what's really unfolding with the technology there.
Yeah, so we invested in Uberian in January last year. So we've been investing into it for about 18 months. But the context there is we're actually talking to the company for about 12 to 18 months before we actually invested. So the enrichment landscape is so unique, and there's very few ways to actually provide your shareholders with exposure to the enrichment space. Enrichment is largely dominated by 4 or 5 key multinationals. It's obviously a very sort of entrenched market. Obviously, enrichment is a highly protected industry for all the right reasons. So when we were talking to Uberian, we were really keen to understand what they were doing, what the enrichment space was looking like going forward, and we actually did pretty substantial due diligence on them. And then, as I said last year, they were sort of keen for us to become involved. So we provided them with around $3 million to become their largest shareholder. And ever since then, the enrichment market is, if you look at the SWU price, which is the equivalent to the yellow cake price for the uranium market, it's continued to go up and up and up. And that's basically the thematic there in the enrichment space is it's dominated by Russia. So Russia accounts for around 45% of all the global enrichment capacity. And the US is now, only has around 8-9% of that global capacity, has become very reliant on Russian enriched uranium coming in from overseas. And so what the US government has basically said and came out with April is that they're just banning Russian enriched uranium coming in over the next couple of years. There's a few exemptions to that, but the thematic is that the Western world, in particular the US, needs to build enrichment capacity as soon as possible. The only problem with that is building enrichment, facilities, which based on the current technology, which is centrifuges, is a 5 to 10 year process and costs billions and billions of dollars. So what the US government is doing is funding very aggressively through multiple bills, uranium technologies, particularly around small modular reactors, particularly around enrichment, and particularly around nuclear reactors in general, right? So they understand the importance of the US building out its own domestic capabilities on that front, and is really keen to understand how new technologies may fit into that. And then you think about Uberian. Uberian's based here in Australia. It has a chemical enrichment technology, and ever since we've invested in chemical enrichment, is not a new way of enriching uranium. It's been chemical enrichment is explored quite extensively in the 1970s. And Uberian continues to develop that technology here in Australia, down at ANSTO, which is down in Lucas Heights in southern Sydney, and has a lab there where it continues to progress what it has. And most people in Australia are aware of Silex, which is obviously an ASX-listed company. It has a laser technology, which again is separate to how it's currently being done, which is centrifuges, and separate to what Uberian is looking at, which is chemical enrichment. So we're incredibly excited about it. All the technology has been classified by the Australian government. So we continue to provide updates to the market sort of as regularly as we can, to give them a sense of how the technology is progressing. and essentially going extremely well. We recently provided an update around sort of what a separation factor was, which is a little bit different to an enrichment factor. So it's all progressing extremely well in a very, very receptive market.
Yeah, so how do you feel that this will, no brainer that the Russian reliance on enriched uranium is reducing, and that's sort of evident to see with a few of the issues. Don't need to go into those. But how do you see this being a real add-on asset for your shareholders, and potentially when this technology does become, potentially bigger scale and utilized more so? Australia at the moment isn't the biggest uranium user, but we do export a lot of it and send it elsewhere. So do you see that as a real potential, or the technology be shifted over to the US, or what's the potential thought processes behind that?
Yeah, it's really fluid, right? So
Mm,
obviously in Australia at the moment, there's prohibition on nuclear essentially. So Uberian has a permit in hand that allows it to do the test work it's allowed to do, and that's sort of sufficient for what I think the company's trying to achieve over the coming years. So at this point in time, it's really well set up in terms of being able to achieve and hit the milestones it's looking for. And then I think if you fast forward a couple of years, and you look at what Salix did, which was pick up the technology and move to the US. There's obviously that's an option moving forward, and then at the same time, you're not quite sure what's going to happen here in Australia. It's also
mm.
become a point of discussion here over the last couple of weeks to months, and I hope that continues to mature and flourish, and we have a real decent, honest conversation about how nuclear could play a role here in Australia. We obviously are very strong advocates for nuclear here in Australia, and think it's an incredibly important part of the overall energy portfolio mix that Australians should be thinking about moving forward. So hopefully that all comes to bear, and then there's some real meaningful changes here in Australia.
So you've got access to really from start to finish the entire potential uranium supply chain within yourselves, and it's not happening overnight. It's going to take a fair bit of time. But if you're looking towards the future for the next 12 months, in particular, what investors can expect coming from GUE, what would be some of those points that you'd like them to take away from this conversation? Remember, this is what they should be anticipating coming through the ASX portal.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I hope we give a sense that we're extremely busy and proactive, right? So we've finished our drill program in Tallahassee, focused really now on the scoping study. That would be a really big milestone for us later this year. Drilling on our Maybell project as well. We'll have all those results coming out over the coming weeks through August onwards from there. And then we'll have the outcomes of that work come out later in the year. And I think the other thing is we're obviously very proactive. You look at our history of how all these assets came to be. We're obviously not stopping now. We're obviously uranium bulls. Think it's got a long way to run. Also, the uranium price, went over 100 earlier this year. It's settled back down now in the mid 80s. We can see it running again over 100. And as soon as you sort of hit that benchmark, you get a flood of generalist investors coming in and trying to understand how they can get exposure to the uranium space. And I think we'll benefit extremely well from that. I think the other thing out there is I think you're going to see a lot of consolidation in the space over the next 6 to 12 months. You've already started to see it a little bit. Paladin over just the last couple of weeks announced that they were acquiring Fission, and that was a Paladin obviously big market cap looking to build out its portfolio, development pipeline of what's next, what are the next assets, and they just continue to want to get, it seems like, bigger and bigger, which makes perfect sense. But you look at the accretion analysis of that, they were trading at $6 a pound. Fission was trading at $3 a pound. And they just made it, from a public markets point of view, that seems like a no-brainer. Well, if you extend that logic to global uranium, we're trading at 20 cents per pound at the moment, right? So, that's obviously unsustainable in some sense, right? There's going to be a lot of companies looking to get bigger. We're sitting with great projects, and we're really undervalued at the moment. So, we sort of are, keen to just create value from what we're doing now, continue to keep on moving forward at a very rapid pace, and look to continue to build the company.
And if I do recall, you mentioned earlier that you did a capital raise earlier this year. And does that sort of give you guys a decent bank balance to sit on, to deploy? And naturally, you said you've got a small and nimble team, which means that, there's probably not a lot of overheads on that. But how does that set you guys up for this sort of short interim period of time with cash available, not to be, consistently, tough position or so to speak?
No, we're blessed, I guess, in that way that we raised, a little bit over $6 million earlier this year, and that $6 million will see us through all of this year. So that's fantastic. And obviously, removes any concerns about how do we fund the programs we're thinking about. They're already pre-funded. We're just executing on a plan that we told shareholders about earlier this year, and we're doing that on time and on budget. So we just continue to get that news flow out. And when I think you start seeing an uptick in the uranium price, we'll move pretty quickly from there.
Okay. And listeners, viewers, people that have stumbled across this or been sent it by a mate and now inquired or interested in GUE, where can they go to access more information? I loved the website. There was a fair bit on there, but potentially reach out to the team or follow them and the ASX. Where can they go to stay on top of what's happening with GUE and see some of these milestones that we've talked about today really coming to the forefront?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think all the traditional pathways are the best way. Obviously, put us on uranium watch list, get on our Twitter, get on our LinkedIn. Very happy, if you send us your email, that we'll put you on our distribution list for sure. And if you're, of particular interest and have any more questions, obviously, very, very important part of my job is speaking to existing shareholders and potential shareholders as well. So very happy to speak to anyone that has any more questions.
There we go. Well, this has covered a lot. It sounds like you're a very busy man, and it's going to continue to be so, but I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me on the show today and exploring and explaining a little bit about what Global Uranium and Enrichment is focusing on, and look forward to hearing and seeing what happens in the future. So thank you so much, Andrew.
Thanks, Ben. That was great. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. Please remember that the topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial advice. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, share, and follow. You can follow the Market Bull on all our socials and keep up to date with global market insights.